He was reminding me just to give a brief introduction rather than a speech. Anyway, I am Lama Yeshe, also John Samuelson. I'm the one from Wisconsin, and I was brought up a good Norwegian Lutheran. But anyway, this is where I ended up. So I have been a monk since 1994, and having completed a 3-year retreat, I was given the title of Lama, which means teacher, which is the same meaning as rabbi. And my most recent job, which I retired from about 2 years ago, was that of a prison chaplain. And so I've had a lot of life experience working with people that have done a lot of harmful things to other people.
My name is David Kaczynski. Was born in Chicago, but now live in upstate New York. I'm currently the executive director of Karma Triyana Dharmachakra Monastery in Woodstock, New York, which is a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. Prior to that, I was executive director of New Yorkers for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Prior to that, I was a social worker working with kids, teenagers in a runaway homeless youth shelter. I'll probably be forever remembered, unfortunately, as the brother of Theodore Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber.
My name is Lama Kathy Wesley, and I am not Norwegian, not Lutheran, but I also grew up in a different faith tradition. I started out as 12 years of Catholic education, right here. All right, yeah. Represent, okay, yeah, so, and then after that, I went to Ohio State University where I studied journalism. Following my graduation, I worked for 15 years as a newspaper reporter at a daily newspaper at a town of about 45,000. And after my 3-year retreat experience, I also received the title of Lama, and I have been now teaching for about 16 years. I've been teaching meditation of various types, and I travel and talk to groups, and I'm blessed, really blessed and honored to be here.
I too am honored to be here. My name is James Knoll. I'm a psychiatrist and in the subspecialty of forensic psychiatry. So I study a lot about violence and violence prevention. I work a lot in corrections. But in general, I guess how I would describe myself to you is the same way that I did. I was in Starbucks the other night with my son, who's 9, and someone was standing a little too close to us, and my son turned to me and said, "Dad, who is that?" And the man overheard us, and I said, "Oh, Casey, that's another citizen of the planet Earth, just like you and me." And so I'm a citizen of the planet Earth, just like you. So.
Well, the Buddha was a human being. He was not a god. He was born an ordinary human being of ordinary parents. But he was dissatisfied with his life and went off on a spiritual quest and eventually became enlightened. The first teaching that he gave after he became enlightened is called the Four Noble Truths. And the very first of these 4 truths is the truth of suffering. He taught that everybody suffers. He talked about birth, old age, sickness, and death. But to go into it even further, that we run into all kinds of things that we don't want to run into that causes us to suffer. and the things that we are looking for and we desire and we want, we usually are not able to find. Or if we do find them, we have to struggle to obtain them, and so forth. So that was the first. He talked a bit like a doctor or a psychiatrist would talk to a patient. So the next is the cause of suffering. And what he said was very simple. The cause of suffering is that we think each one of us is the center of the universe, the most important person in the universe, and that we are separate from everybody else. And we really don't care that much for other people if our interests are in front of us, and that we don't mind causing other people to suffer and give them pain and so forth, if we can get what we want. And so that was the cause of suffering. That's the disease. If you want to call it a physical disease, it's a disease. You could call it a mental illness or a neurosis. Some Tibetan teachers talk about all of us as being neurotic. So let's call it neurosis. It's a little less pejorative. The third of the Noble Truths is that it is possible for suffering to cease. In other words, you do not have a terminal illness. It's curable. And the fourth is that there is a path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And to sum up the path very, very simply, and I'm trying to keep this simple, it is a path of developing more and more loving kindness and compassion for others and less attachment to your own self-interest. It's really nothing more complicated than that. And the more attention you pay to others and their well-being, the less attention you naturally pay to yourself and your own wants and desires. And the amazing thing is the less you think about what you want and don't have and what you need and so forth, the more satisfied and contented you become. We don't become satisfied and contented by continuously shopping until we drop. It's never going to happen. So, with that introduction, now I'd like to go into a little bit about my own personal journey. And by the time I was probably 20 or 21, I had let go of the Lutheran background. You can't ever let go of your Norwegian background, though. There's a lot of Norwegians where I live, and one of the jokes is that, yeah, I'm Norwegian, but I'm taking medication. So anyway, when I was 40 years old, my best friend in a little town of about 10,000 people was run over by a Caterpillar road grader with a big snowplow blade on front of it. And it was a horrible thing. I don't want to go into it because you don't need another one of these. But anyway, I can't believe how hard it hit me. And his wife, the police came to her house and said, call up somebody so they'll be here, and I'll stay here until they get here. And she called up me. Anyway, what happened was that for me, it just completely devastated me. I felt that the meaning had been taken out of my life because I started thinking about this. If he could die like that, I could die at any minute. And then, well, what's important in life? What's the meaning of life? You know, these questions you ask when you're young and then you eventually give up asking because you haven't found an answer. And I became depressed, I started sleeping 14, 16 hours a day, feeling absolutely miserable, despondent, powerless, dejected. And what did I do? I blamed my wife. And in no time at all, I told her that I wanted a divorce. And well, after that, then we went to marriage counseling. I went to a psychiatrist, was put on a very strong antidepressant drug, and yada, 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 yada. And eventually, the counseling proved fruitless, and the divorce went through. Now, the man's widow, she took a different path. This is the path she took. I was with him maybe a half hour before the accident, and I asked him if I could go along with him. And he said, "No, you go home and fix supper, I'll meet you there." And then she would think. But if I hadn't listened to him and would have gone along with him, I would have prevented the accident. Therefore, I killed him. And she went the same place that I did, but she had no one to divorce. And she went through incredibly bad times. And she went into a very destructive relationship with a man after that, continually blaming herself for killing her husband, which she obviously hadn't. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is what we do when situations like this, or even situations much less serious than this, happen. We tend to blame ourselves. We're responsible for whatever difficulties we're facing. And in blaming ourselves, we give up our power to do anything. If you're blaming yourself, you become helpless, hopeless, despondent, dejected, and you fall into despair and depression. This is what's going to happen. And I'm sure many of you that have had children killed have had these kinds of thoughts go through your head, that if I just would have kept that child home because he had a runny nose, and I could, I could have kept him home sick, or whatever. If you would have just done one thing different, the whole thing would have changed. It's so easy to think that way. Or the other is to start blaming other things. And as soon as you start blaming, you give up your power. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't change anything. You can't work with anything. You become totally helpless and despondent and so forth. Now, the good thing, what happened with me was that within about a year and a half, I had an opportunity to meditate. And I had gotten through the 60s without meditation. I was there. At least I don't remember meditating in the 60s. I got through the 70s without meditating. I got through most of the 80s without meditating. My friend was killed on November 1st, 1985, by the way. And in March of '87, while I was still on medication, I started meditating. And very quickly, I went from medication to meditation. And I also very quickly realized that Buddhism has made a religion of mental health. And I'm serious about this. That, as I said, you could look at it as we are all neurotic. And one Tibetan teacher said, you work with your neurosis. You're all neurotic, but you work with your neurosis. Our neurosis is workable. The truth of the path. There is a path where we work on our neurosis. We don't give in to it. Now, in Buddhism, there is a very powerful symbol, and it is the lotus. It's a flower that's like a water lily. The lotuses grow in swamps. I was pointed out this bog over here. This is a perfect example of could be a lotus pool. Now this is what is really important about this symbol. It's not just an ordinary flower, that this grows in the slime and the muck. And it will grow out of the slime and the muck and bloom stainlessly perfect white. And so the symbolism is that in the slime and the muck, the suffering, the chaos, the killing, the violence, and so forth of our worldly existence, our inner perfection can bloom, and it is completely stainless. And all of the slime and the muck and everything else is lotus fertilizer. It's not an herbicide, it is fertilizer. And if there's anything I want to leave you with tonight is you can work with whatever you run into and use it as fertilizer. You can use it to grow spiritually. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. So if you start blaming yourself, you're cursing the darkness. If you start blaming somebody else, you're cursing the darkness. If you can let the love, which is inherent to your very being, come forth, you're lighting a candle. It's really that simple. Love is a candle. Compassion is a candle. When you're cursing the darkness, you're cursing the past. You're always cursing the past, not what is in the present. We have, in Buddhism, we talk about the now. Love is in the now. If love really is love, if compassion really is compassion, it's in the now. It's not something that you have done sometime in the past, because that's no longer alive. The past is like a rotten seed, the Tibetans say. Nothing can grow from a rotten seed. So love is in the present. Love is how you're feeling right now. The Dalai Lama has also said one candle can light 1,000 and never be diminished. And there are a lot of candles that need to be lit here. Also, in Buddhism, it is said this, that ordinary sentient beings remain ordinary sentient beings by constantly working for their own benefit. Buddhas become Buddhas by constantly working for the benefit of others. And I want to complete my part of this talk by mentioning Viktor Frankl, who was Jewish. He happened to be alive when a madman took over a country, killed 6 million Jews and tens of millions of other people, and in the end had to commit suicide. Does this sound familiar? It's a familiar pattern. And Viktor Frankl wrote a book about his experience being in numerous concentration camps during the Second World War. And the book is Man's Search for Meaning. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. And when he talks about his concentration camp experience, it's amazing how little anger there is that he has towards his captors. We Buddhists say that anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, by the way. It just isn't a good idea. But what he said, what kept him alive in these camps, what kept him from despair, And he said as soon as you had despair, you would be dead in a month or two from disease. Was thinking of his wife, who he knew was probably dead, but thinking about the love he had for his wife. And that's what kept him alive. That's what kept him from total despair. And then I hope I can get through this other poem. I'm going to try. It's by William Blake, who's a Christian. And it is, love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but willingly gives its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair.
Unlike the other panelists here, I'm not an expert in mental health. I'm not an expert in Buddhism. What I have to tell you are my personal story, snippets of my personal story. About the time I was first getting interested in Buddhism and beginning to take teachings in Buddhism, I was serving as a assistant director of a runaway homeless youth shelter in Albany, New York. And I actually got a great deal of satisfaction out of trying to help troubled kids and their families, but also some sense of, helplessness. I can't always help them in the way they won't listen to my good advice and so forth. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But I was really struck by the commonality between a kind of Buddhist approach to people and best practices in social work. It seemed like there was a real clear sense that you treat people with compassion, with respect. And I think part of what I really understood and picked up is the idea of journey. In Buddhism, we often call it a path, but a sense that everyone is on a path. They're not necessarily going to be where you want them to be or where you think they should be, and that everybody's path is unique and individual. And certainly that sense of journey was to become more important for me as I went through my own life trauma. In 1990, I had the good fortune to marry a woman I'd adored for years, had met in the 7th grade, and she ultimately said, "Yeah, Dave, I kind of like you too." And her name is Linda, a huge important part of this story. I think the important thing maybe is to maybe look at this from a family member's perspective. Linda was actually the first person to help me understand after we were married that my brother Ted wasn't just a little different, just wasn't eccentric, but that there was actual mental illness there. We consulted with a psychiatrist. We asked for, help and how we could help Ted, but Ted had by this time isolated himself out in the woods in Montana. He basically had cut off from us about the time I was married. He'd cut off from our parents some years before. So again, there was the sense of helplessness. I'd like to help my brother, but I don't know how. But in some ways, the family is the last to know. It was about 5 years later that Linda came to me and said, "David, do you think any possibility, don't get angry at me, but do you think any possibility that your brother could be this Unabomber that everybody is talking about?" And my first reaction was absolutely no way. I mean, Ted had never been violent. I never remembered him being violent. Sure, he's mentally ill, but you got to understand, most people with mental illness are not at all violent, no more violent than the rest of us. And I was actually a little offended, but as time went on and Linda was persistent, and ultimately the Unabomber's Manifesto was published in the Washington Post, and I read it, and all of a sudden I got this horrible chill and began to feel, my gosh, this sounds like my brother's voice. And in those early days, I still thought it was only a slim possibility, but I'd sort of opened the door a crack and was beginning to understand that it might be real. As we studied, as we investigated, the time went on, and at one point I remember lying in bed with my wife and saying, hon, I think it might be a 50-50 chance. And this was really the first time I'd acknowledged to Linda. Linda, ironically, had never met Ted, so it was kind of like I was the sort of reality check for her for her suspicions, and ultimately we got to the point where we felt we were facing a choice. And if you think about it, it was an extraordinarily dramatic choice. It seemed like a no-win situation. Whatever choice we made could lead to somebody dying. If we did nothing and my brother was indeed the Unabomber, some other person, innocent person, might die. On the other hand, if we went to the authorities, turned Ted in, if we stopped the Unabomber, he could well be subject to the death penalty or killed when he was being arrested. At this point, I actually agonized and decided not to tell our mother. At this point, she was 79 years old. She had worried about Ted for years because of his estrangement from the family. Believe me, Mom's worst nightmare didn't come close to this possibility that my brother might be the most wanted person in America, a serial killer. I think whether you're a family member of a victim of homicide or you're a family member of a murderer, boy, you're the last to think that this was going to happen in your family. You don't imagine that your family is going to be affected in this way. Ultimately, I think Linda and I felt we really had no choice. I mean, we could not live with ourselves. If we did nothing and another innocent person died, we'd have to go through the rest of our lives with blood on our hands. And in some ways, I really need to, my story has been told plenty. Linda's story has not been told, and yet it's an absolute essential key. It's that bystander who sees something and has the courage maybe to take a risk and to press a little farther and to say what needs to be said. Not to bury that uncomfortable thought, but to pursue it in the interests of protecting other people. Even when we went to the FBI, I thought it might be 50-50 at that point, and so we hoped and prayed that I'd never have to tell Mom, that they would investigate and find out that Ted was completely innocent. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and the day came when one of the FBI agents called me and said, "David, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your brother has actually moved to the top of our suspect list. We really need to speak with your mom. Now, do you think maybe you could go to your mom, tell her kind of what's going on, and try to persuade her to meet with us?" So this meant going to my mom, telling her something that was going to end her happiness, possibly make her very angry at me. When I told her what I'd done, I was afraid that I'd lose her love that day. I remember I went to my mom's apartment. She lived about 3 miles from us at that point. I knocked on her door. She opens her door. At first she's happy because her son is standing there, and then within a few seconds she gets this worried look on her face and she says, "David, you look terrible. What's the matter? Did something happen?" And I said, "Mom, I think you better sit down." And guess what Mom said? "Oh my God, did something happen to Ted?" She just worried for so many years, she somehow knew it was about Ted. But I persuaded her to go back into the apartment. She sat down. I was kind of pacing the floor thinking, how can I share this news with my mother in a way that doesn't absolutely crush her? And I started talking about places the Unabomber had been and ideas, philosophies the Unabomber had written in his manifesto, and then pointed out the commonalities with her other son. And Mom, was a bright woman. She was connecting the dots very quickly, and she's sitting there just looking at me with this look of horror and disbelief on her face. And I knew my mother loved me with all her heart. I knew she loved Ted with all her heart. I had no idea how a mother would kind of put this together. One son suspected of horrible crimes, the other son perhaps having handed him over to the executioner. And I started crying a little bit, and at this point I just really had to lay all the cards out, and I said, Mom, I think there's a possibility Ted might be the Unabomber, and Mom, I've actually gone to the FBI. I've shared my suspicions. Let's hope I'm completely wrong, but Ted is currently under investigation. I lost Mom about 1.5 years ago, but this is the memory of my mother that I'll always carry with me till my dying day. At that point, she was quiet for a moment. There was kind of like a stunned silence. And then she got up out of her chair. She was a very short little woman, under 5 feet tall. I'm a little over 6 feet tall. And without saying a word, she just walked up to me. She reached her arms up around my neck. She pulled me down, and she put a kiss on my cheek. It's like a mother's blessing. And the first thing she said was, "David, I can't imagine what you've been going through, what you've been struggling with." It had to have been the worst day of her life, and here she is, concerned about my feelings. And the next thing she said was the most comforting thing I could have heard. She said, "David, I know that you love Ted. I know that you wouldn't have done this unless you truly felt that you had to." And in that moment, I realized I hadn't lost Mom's love, that Linda, Mom, and I would be in this, face this ordeal together. Ted was actually arrested about a week later, maybe 10 days later, and it was all over the national news. We'd actually received a promise of confidentiality. I was told by the government, nobody will ever know how we caught your brother. Well, you know how that turned out. Here I am watching the TV, and not only is my brother being arrested, and there's one of the evening anchors saying, well, you know, another interesting sidelight, apparently Kaczynski was turned in by his own brother, David, who lives in Schenectady, New York. And, you know, within minutes, like in Mom's parking lot, there were satellite trucks and cameras and satellite dishes, and, you know, all of a sudden this sort of very personal, private, ethical decision, family tragedy, was all public, and people wondering, you know, what kind of a brother would turn in a brother? What kind of a family could possibly produce someone this deranged and this violent? I know at one point, I think that this was when the government did announce that they would seek the death penalty against my brother. I was feeling like a victim. Now, nobody had hurt me. Nobody had hurt any of my loved ones. But I felt, look, I did this difficult thing, and here's how I'm repaid. They break a promise to me. When government and I were working together, it was to save lives. But now that the government wants to kill someone, we're on different sides. I don't want my brother to die. And I think, you know, I would come home from work and I would rant and be angry, and I felt, you know, this sort of despair and anger and felt like a victim. And, you know, at one point, Linda just heard a little bit too much of it. And she said, "David, you know, if you think this is about you, you got another thing coming. You know, this is, sure, you know, this is really awful stuff, but there are real victims out there. There are people who've been maimed, there are people who've been killed, there are families that will never, ever be the same." And I said, "Oh, but my pain is different. I have guilt on top of all of that." And, you know, maybe you can imagine the rest of the conversation, but it kind of ended like with me thinking, maybe I need to reframe this. And the next morning, Linda and I have been Buddhist. We do a morning meditation. When we went into our meditation room in the morning, I saw that she had put up 3 candles on the altar. And I didn't have to ask who those candles represented. They represented the 3 people that my brother had killed and their families. And so for the next 3 or 4 years, we meditated on compassion, trying to understand and grasp some element of the harm that my brother had done. My brother was lucky. Unlike a lot of people who commit serious crimes, my brother had great attorneys. Our family really went to bat for him, trying to explain to people that he was seriously mentally ill. This case was different. In any case, the case was resolved. The legal case was resolved with life. My brother was given life. My mother and I attended the trial in Sacramento, California, and on the day that the trial ended, Mom and I were in the apartment we had rented, obviously not celebrating, actually kind of wondering very quietly, how are we going to go on? What are we going to do with this for the rest of our lives? When the telephone rang and we were contacted by a chaplain who identified herself as working with law enforcement in Sacramento, and she was calling to let us know that there was a victim family that wanted to meet with us. I actually wanted to protect Mom. I thought, gee, these folks are probably going to be really angry, you know. Mom, why don't you stay here? I'll go and meet with the victims. And Mom wouldn't hear of it. She said, if they want to talk to me, how could I possibly say no? So the chaplain came and picked us up, drove us back to the federal building where the trial had been held. But this time she took us into an upper floor, let us out of an elevator, ushered us into a conference room, and as Mom and I walked into this room, we saw that there were 5 chairs arranged in a circle. 3 of the chairs held the wife of somebody my brother had killed, her sister, and her late husband's sister. The 2 vacant chairs were obviously waiting for me and Mom to sit down in. You know, as we walked in, there was only one thing we could be saying, which is, we're sorry, we're so sorry. I saw a tear trickling down Mom's face, and as we sat down, I was kind of almost prepared, you know, for a blast of anger, hostility. I really didn't know why they wanted to see us. And the widow spoke for the family. The first thing she said was that they had talked about this during the trial. They had decided that if there was ever an opportunity to do it in person, they wanted to thank us for turning in Ted. So they hadn't called us there to yell at us. They called us there to thank us. And that seemed to me, under the circumstances, extraordinarily moving and graceful. She said she couldn't imagine what it would be like to turn in a family member in like a death penalty case. And I'm thinking, I can't imagine what it would be like to lose my spouse to some maniac's bomb. We actually ended up, you know, hugging, crying all together. It's like, for all the therapy I'd received, and I've received plenty over these times, the counseling and the friendship and the hugging from friends and neighbors, nothing was more meaningful for me than this opportunity to meet with a family of victims. And I think for me, what was so meaningful about it is that it had a promise, like, if not a promise, like a suggestion that maybe healing could begin. If these 2 families could talk to each other, if they could be decent, if they could recognize each other's pain, maybe the world could be healed. The world, so many worlds blown apart by my brother, could begin to rub together. Mom was in, remember, she's Ted Kaczynski's mother, and she had something that she needed to say, and it probably wasn't the right time and place if you think about it. But what she said was, you know, I want you to understand, my son isn't an evil person. He's very, very sick. He's not a monster. He's just really mentally ill. And she started talking about schizophrenia, and I happened to be looking into the faces of the 3 women, and I realized they didn't like what they were hearing. It was like Mom was trying to tell them something. What they heard was somebody making excuses. And I almost wished there was some way I could gesture to my mom to get her to change the subject, but she kept going on, and at one point she really did cross a line. She said, you know, it really isn't my son that we should blame, it's his illness. And the widow at that point just blurted out, she said, he knew what he was doing. And all of a sudden, it was like the room was frozen in silence. Like, we'd felt so close to this family, and now put Ted in the mix, and it's like the Grand Canyon is between us. And I'm thinking, maybe we tried too much. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe we just needed to leave and somehow do it gracefully. At that point, I saw Mom just sort of scrunch up almost into a ball, like almost trying to hide right in the middle of the room. And looking down at her shoes, she said, I really wish he had killed me instead of your husband. I think that was the truth. If Mom could have laid down her life to erase any of this pain, she would have done so. But when she said that, I happened to be looking at the widow's face, and, you know, I saw some of the hardness melt and some tears begin to well up. She had children too. She could identify with Mom as a mother to a mother, and she said, oh, Mrs. Kaczynski. She got up out of her chair, she knelt right down in front of my mom, put her hand up on Mom's shoulder and said, oh, Mrs. Kaczynski, none of this is your fault. You're not to blame. Don't ever, ever think that we blame you for this. it was really, in some ways, it was the most memorable thing that happened for me, because I saw a human being in pain trying to comfort another human being in pain. It was like there was some possibility that this practice of compassion could actually transform everything, you know. None of our lives will be the same. You know, our journeys were changed. This community will never be the same. Clearly, people directly impacted and their families will never be the same. I think we can work with the emotions. I think we can take them toward a place of compassion and love. It's the only way forward.
I'm so happy that we are all here, because we're all here with you. And when I walked onto the ground here, I said, I feel like I'm walking on hallowed ground. And that's how it felt to come here, and I want to thank you for asking us to be here. And I want to thank you for being here. To share together some words, and to share together some thoughts and some feelings, and to share in what the inaugural poet, Richard Blanco, called the impossible vocabulary of sorrow. Here we are together, reaching out across the divide. We are talking about transformation and change. We're talking about how the mud gives birth to the lotus flower. We're talking about how pain and suffering gives rise to the highest good. We're talking about a person, the Buddha, who left home to try to find the meaning in his life. He left home to try to find the meaning in suffering, and he found it. And what he taught after that became the basis for, as Lama Yeshe said earlier, a mental wellness that has the clothing of religion. Because the Buddha taught that suffering came from within us, and that because it rises from within us, it can be worked with, it can be addressed, it can be encountered, contacted, it can be touched and changed. Why? Because it all arises from within the mind. Recently, His Holiness Jawan Karmapa was interviewed for a film called The Continuum. And in that film, he is quoted as saying, "Our mind is our home. It is our most precious home. If we spend some time in our home each day, we will be nurtured there, and it will be a place to which we can always return." And this is the beginning of healing. This is the beginning of working with our thoughts, our feelings, and emotions, because they come from within us. They come from the mind. And so this is why all of the methods of Buddhism have to do with our mind, working with our mind, working with our feelings. You've heard a lot about love and compassion this evening, the power of the story that David told, the power of the story that Lama Yeshe told. These stories are powerful because they are true, and they're powerful because they are real within us. Love and compassion is taught by all of the great world faith traditions, and there's a reason for this commonality, because it is love that heals. It's love that takes us outside of our own pain. All of us have a potential for goodness. This was the Buddha's teaching. We all have the potential to wake up, to know ourselves, and to know ourselves completely. In fact, we're a little parochial in Buddhism. We call it Buddha nature. Everyone has a mind, and that mind has the potential to experience great happiness. I'll never forget the day that my teacher said to all of us, he said, if you only knew who you really were, and he looked at all of the faces in the crowd. He says, if you only knew who you really were and what goodness you were capable of, he said, you would be astounded and amazed. And it was that day that I realized that I had chosen well when I had chosen him as a teacher, because he was about affirmation. He was about affirming the basic goodness of people, which we see each and every day in ways large and small in our lives. The work that I have been doing over the last 15 years has been to teach people meditation. Both the quiet sitting meditation, in which we allow our mind to rest on the breath and let go of the thoughts that arise for us. Very simple method of attending to the breath, and then when thoughts inevitably cross the mind, touching them lightly with our attention, letting them go, and then returning to the breath for a fresh start. This incredibly simple technique allows us to let go. Because if you remember from Lama Yeshe's description of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha said suffering is part of life. It has a cause, and that cause is clinging and fixation. It has a solution, which is letting go. And there is a path to letting go. So this ability to let go that is established for us on the meditation seat is the beginning of our ability to work with whatever arises within our mind. Everyone knows the poet Shakespeare. He said, nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So really, happiness and suffering happens within the mind. All of my friends in the 12-step recovery tradition say that happiness is an inside job. It's something we do within ourselves. And so the methods of meditation have helped me in my personal life. But the piece of Buddhist teachings that have helped me the most in my own life have been the teachings on love and compassion. Now, everyone talks about love and compassion, but few tell you how. How do you feel love? How do you feel compassion? How do you cultivate love? How do you cultivate compassion? And so the methodology, this is what I feel is the key. Long, long ago, a Buddhist monk lived in Indonesia. He had been there for many years, preaching the Buddhist teachings. And a wandering monk from India came to see him and said, I have been sent by a vision. They said to come here and receive teachings from you. What special teachings do you have to give me? And this teacher, named Serlengpa, said, I'm going to teach you how to train your mind in love. I'm going to teach you how to train your mind in love. Now, of course, we might think this is a little ridiculous. I mean, we all feel love naturally. Why should we have to train in it? It just comes naturally, doesn't it? But the answer is no. It comes naturally for those we feel close to, but it doesn't come naturally for those we don't feel close to. In fact, you could say that there are even some people who stand outside the fence of our love and compassion. Perhaps it's people we disagree with on politics. Perhaps it's people we disagree with on religion. Or people we feel endangered by, we feel threatened by. But those people stand outside the fence of our love and compassion, and therefore we could potentially harm them, because that's what we do. So we have to learn to train our minds in love and train our minds in compassion. And so these methods that were taught by the Buddha, taken to Indonesia, and then re-imported back to India, and then to Tibet, These methods are lojong, mind training, teach us how to train the mind in love. How do we do it? We do it by sitting comfortably and allowing our mind to rest on the breath. And as we breathe out, we think, I extend my love to all. I wish for all beings to be happy. On the in-breath, we think, may all beings be free of suffering. Out-breath, may all beings be happy. In-breath, may all beings be free of suffering. And we do it for ourselves first. We do it for ourselves first. And what this very simple method does is it allows us to love ourselves as though we were our own children. We were our own parents. We all need nurturing and we all need love and compassion. And we start with ourselves and then expand toward others. First for those we love, then for those we are indifferent toward, and finally to those we dislike. So this method of meditation has helped me so much in my life because it has allowed me to let go of the things that trouble me and to engender the things that heal. The other thing that helps me in my own life is the aspiration to be of benefit to every single person I encounter. This is one of the teachings that Serlingpa gave to Atisha and he took back to India and then to Tibet. Always wish to be of benefit to everyone you encounter. Make every relationship, even casual ones on the street, be about the benefit of others. Even if you don't know what to do, even if you feel helpless, wish in your heart, may I be of benefit to you whom I'm encountering. This simple wish to be of benefit to others is transformative. If you think it enough, it will become your new normal. It will become what you do. It will become how you relate. It will become how you relate to yourselves and others. So for me, the wish to be of benefit to others is something I do because I've practiced it over and over again. I wake up in the morning and I think, may everything I do today benefit beings in some way, and may we all come to awakening. And when I feel that someone's looking at me and I feel uncomfortable, like in a large room with a lot of people in it, I think, well, even if I make a fool of myself, may it be for the benefit of all. This is the way that human beings can influence one another. And I'm going to close with a short story from when I was a newspaper reporter. Human beings, what we do is we influence each other. Yes, we do, with the way we look, with the way we speak, the inflections, our body language. We're always talking and communicating with each other continuously, a language of unseen words. When I was a reporter, I was asked to go interview the lady who rings the church bells at noontime in the little town that I live in. And I interviewed her, and she was a woman of strong faith. And I said to her, well, what is it that brings you down here every day to play for 10 or 15 minutes at the lunch hour? And she said, well, she said, I believe that there are good influences and negative influences everywhere. Every town has negative influences, and every town has positive influences. And she says, and I want to be one of the good ones. So with that, I'll close and thank you.
Well, some of us carry heavier burdens of neurosis and have to extensively type down their words, so please bear with me here. Although your mission involves listening and learning from various panels, my guess is that it has been the people on the panels who have had the most to learn from you. I'm here today as a forensic psychiatrist, a Buddhist, but most importantly, your brother and fellow human being. I feel deep gratitude over being a part of this gathering, and I hope I can contribute in a helpful way. I wanted to give a brief introduction of what led me here, and then mention a few points on trauma, healing, and resilience from a mental health standpoint. Afterwards, I'm happy to try to answer any questions, if we have time, about violence prevention from a psychiatric standpoint. So, when I was about 10 years old, not a little older than my son is now, I saw something that would stick in my memory for the rest of my life. It was a Time magazine cover. At the center of it was a large vat of Kool-Aid, and surrounding the vat were numerous bodies. Now, I'm not sure if it was that I was unable to process what it meant at that age, or perhaps I could process it only too well. The Buddhists are fond of saying that the mind of a child is so open and honest. Regardless, I fixated on it. Later, my school teacher gave us the assignment of writing a short story. And while other children were writing their stories about sports figures or the family pet, I was busy crafting an attempt to fathom something dreadful. In my story, I was a Jonestown member who had managed to hide and escape. I can only speculate on my teacher's reaction to my work. If it signaled a need for a concerned parent-teacher conference, I was not invited. Retrospectively, I wonder if this was an early warning sign I may become a forensic psychiatrist. Somebody should have alerted the authorities. I have found that much of my career has been focused on similar themes, though, in all honesty. As a physician and later as a forensic psychiatrist, I found that violence and death have been a daily focus of my concern. And after a while, I began to wonder why this had come about. I come from two previous generations of physicians, which is proof that the obsessive-compulsive genes can be inherited. My family lost several patriarchs at an early age, one from suicide. And after much thought and assistance from those wiser than me, the vague outlines of answers began to surface. I think it is possible that my family chose a field, medicine, that concerns itself with trying to see death coming, prepare for it, and if possible, stave it off. But I found that in trying so hard to do this, it is easy to lose the present moment, which is where life is to be found. I chose to go into the medical discipline that deals with the mind, and since Buddhists have been studying the mind for some 2,500 years, I found that they had an incredible amount to offer here, and I was astounded at how much it overlapped with Western psychology. What I found through my study of both psychiatry and Buddhism is that two of the mind's greatest foes are fear and a powerful pull to value one's self, sometimes at the expense of peace and gratitude. The Sandy Hook Promise states that your hearts are broken, but your spirit is not, and I am humbled by this. You've put into action the advice of a beloved Buddhist nun who said that the key to dealing with fear and to achieving peace is the willingness to take in the pain and suffering of ourselves and others and send out happiness to all. The amazing thing to me is that all across the country, and indeed all across the planet, this is precisely how the people of Sandy Hook are seen and revered. You've opened your hearts and minds to whatever arises. You've been breathing in the suffering and sending out relief. Part of your mission is to help the community heal, so I wanted to share with you a bit of what is known about this vital task from a mental health viewpoint. Psychiatric research suggests that after a major trauma, people's belief systems are impacted and can undergo modification. They may expect changes to their worldview as they knew it, their views on human nature, spirituality, and even their own identity. Grief and recovery are necessary, and stress reactions are very, very common and typical, and they include things such as, I'm sure you've heard before, reliving the event, avoidance, feelings of guilt, and a heightened physiological response. Too little work, in my opinion, has been done on understanding resilient survivors, but it appears that they cope early on by cultivating the following. First, a sense of safety, then a sense of calm, then a sense of personal efficacy, and then a sense of social connectiveness. And I'm extremely impressed at how you all have done this. And then finally, the most important thing after all these are accomplished is developing and maintaining a sense of realistic optimism. Finally, resilient survivors find a way to process and reorganize the trauma into an opportunity for positive change. In this spirit, please let me give an example of a man I had the good fortune to meet by the name of Tim Carter. You probably don't recognize his name. He is one of only 4 living persons who survived the mass killing at Jonestown in 1978. He was a man who survived deadly combat as a U.S. Marine in Vietnam, and then ends up surviving the Jonestown tragedy. I knew I had to meet this man, and I learned from him, and so I did. I was able to track him down and ended up collaborating with him on a panel much like this one. I asked him to help me better understand how he was able to bounce back from a lifetime of trauma that would seem to have crushed me personally. He told me I had to forgive myself first and show myself compassion and then get my own house in order. Then I had to ask him the question. My heart started pounding because I knew that this might be my only chance. I nervously said, "Tim, after all that, how do you..." He mercifully finished my question for me. Find meaning? It took a while, but I found deep meaning in how the experiences had transformed me. He said he relied on 3 things: his friends, his spirituality, and professional help when he needed it. It won't surprise you to know that he had an abundance of positive coping skills, among them an emotional openness, a great sense of humor, and it was also apparent to me that here was a person who had never stopped listening and had never stopped learning. Please bear with me for one more example, one last example from my studies. This one all the way from Norway. On July 22nd, 2011, Norway experienced the immeasurable loss and trauma when a man named Breivik killed over 70 innocent people. Immediately after, there was a remarkable and courageous response, much like your own. And I wanted to share with you the reflections of the medical first responders in their own words. These are just a few snippets. The collective responses from society have called for more togetherness, fellowship. And after some time had passed, I was left with a feeling of emptiness. Thoughts were slowly seeping in. Questions and self-reproach came up. Most important of all was to be compassionate and caring, enduring the pain of others, leaning forward and being there. In terms of the broad goals of violence reduction, both my training in psychiatry and study of Buddhism have led me to believe that this is something that can only come from within each individual. That is, violence can't be forced on the unwilling. It seems almost too simplistic, but worth thinking deeply about. Any movement towards peace must begin in each individual's own mind. Each of us must somehow learn for ourselves how to, for the benefit of others, cultivate a fearless compassion, to allow our own pain to become a stepping stone for understanding the pain of others, and to have our spirits unbroken even when our hearts are. Thank you. Well, some of us carry heavier burdens of neurosis and have to extensively type down their words, so please bear with me here. Although your mission involves listening and learning from various panels, my guess is that it has been the people on the panels who have had the most to learn from you. I'm here today as a forensic psychiatrist, a Buddhist, but most importantly, your brother and fellow human being. I feel deep gratitude over being a part of this gathering, and I hope I can contribute in a helpful way. I wanted to give a brief introduction of what led me here, and then mention a few points on trauma, healing, and resilience from a mental health standpoint. Afterwards, I'm happy to try to answer any questions, if we have time, about violence prevention from a psychiatric standpoint. So, when I was about 10 years old, not a little older than my son is now, I saw something that would stick in my memory for the rest of my life. It was a Time magazine cover. At the center of it was a large vat of Kool-Aid, and surrounding the vat were numerous bodies. And I'm not sure if it was that I was unable to process what it meant at that age, or perhaps I could process it only too well. The Buddhists are fond of saying that the mind of a child is so open and honest. Regardless, I fixated on it. Later, my school teacher gave us the assignment of writing a short story. And while other children were writing their stories about sports figures or the family pet, I was busy crafting an attempt to fathom something dreadful. In my story, I was a Jonestown member who had managed to hide and escape. I can only speculate on my teacher's reaction to my work. If it signaled a need for a concerned parent-teacher conference, I was not invited. Retrospectively, I wonder if this was an early warning sign I may become a forensic psychiatrist. Somebody should have alerted the authorities. I have found that much of my career has been focused on similar themes, though, in all honesty. As a physician and later as a forensic psychiatrist, I found that violence and death have been a daily focus of my concern. And after a while, I began to wonder why this had come about. I come from two previous generations of physicians, which is proof that the obsessive-compulsive genes can be inherited. My family lost several patriarchs at an early age, one from suicide. And after much thought and assistance from those wiser than me, the vague outlines of answers began to surface. I think it is possible that my family chose a field, medicine, that concerns itself with trying to see death coming, prepare for it, and if possible, stave it off. But I found that in trying so hard to do this, it is easy to lose the present moment, which is where life is to be found. I chose to go into the medical discipline that deals with the mind, and since Buddhists have been studying the mind for some 2,500 years, I found that they had an incredible amount to offer here, and I was astounded at how much it overlapped with Western psychology. What I found through my study of both psychiatry and Buddhism is that two of the mind's greatest foes are fear and a powerful pull to value oneself, sometimes at the expense of peace and gratitude. The Sandy Hook Promise states that your hearts are broken, but your spirit is not, and I am humbled by this. You've put into action the advice of a beloved Buddhist nun who said that the key to dealing with fear and to achieving peace is the willingness to take in the pain and suffering of ourselves and others and send out happiness to all. The amazing thing to me is that all across the country, and indeed all across the planet, this is precisely how the people of Sandy Hook are seen and revered. You've opened your hearts and minds to whatever arises. You've been breathing in the suffering and sending out relief. Part of your mission is to help the community heal, so I wanted to share with you a bit of what is known about this vital task from a mental health viewpoint. Psychiatric research suggests that after a major trauma, people's belief systems are impacted and can undergo modification. They may expect changes to their worldview as they knew it, their views on human nature, spirituality, and even their own identity. Grief and recovery are necessary, and stress reactions are very, very common and typical, and they include things such as, I'm sure you've heard before, reliving the event, avoidance, feelings of guilt, and a heightened physiological response. Too little work, in my opinion, has been done on understanding resilient survivors, but it appears that they cope early on by cultivating the following. First, a sense of safety, then a sense of calm, then a sense of personal efficacy, And then a sense of social connectedness. And I'm extremely impressed at how you all have done this. And then finally, the most important thing after all these are accomplished is developing and maintaining a sense of realistic optimism. Finally, resilient survivors find a way to process and reorganize the trauma into an opportunity for positive change. In this spirit, please let me give an example of a man I had the good fortune to meet by the name of Tim Carter. You probably don't recognize his name. He is one of only 4 living persons who survived the mass killing at Jonestown in 1978. He was a man who survived deadly combat as a U.S. Marine in Vietnam, and then ends up surviving the Jonestown tragedy. I knew I had to meet this man, and I learned from him, and so I did. I was able to track him down and ended up collaborating with him on a panel much like this one. I asked him to help me better understand how he was able to bounce back from a lifetime of trauma that would seem to have crushed me personally. He told me I had to forgive myself first and show myself compassion and then get my own house in order. Then I had to ask him the question. My heart started pounding because I knew that this might be my only chance. I nervously said, "Tim, after all that, how do you..." He mercifully finished my question for me. Find meaning? It took a while, but I found deep meaning in how the experiences had transformed me. He said he relied on 3 things: his friends, his spirituality, and professional help when he needed it. It won't surprise you to know that he had an abundance of positive coping skills, among them an emotional openness, a great sense of humor, and it was also apparent to me that here was a person who had never stopped listening and had never stopped learning. Please bear with me for one more example, one last example from my studies. This one all the way from Norway. On July 22nd, 2011, Norway experienced the immeasurable loss and trauma when a man named Breivik killed over 70 innocent people. Immediately after, there was a remarkable and courageous response, much like your own. And I wanted to share with you the reflections of the medical first responders in their own words. These are just a few snippets. The collective responses from society have called for more togetherness, fellowship. And after some time had passed, I was left with a feeling of emptiness. Thoughts were slowly seeping in. Questions and self-reproach came up. Most important of all was to be compassionate and caring, enduring the pain of others, leaning forward and being there. In terms of the broad goals of violence reduction, both my training in psychiatry and study of Buddhism have led me to believe that this is something that can only come from within each individual. That is, violence can't be forced on the unwilling. It seems almost too simplistic, but worth thinking deeply about. Any movement towards peace must begin in each individual's own mind. Each of us must somehow learn for ourselves how to, for the benefit of others, cultivate a fearless compassion, to allow our own pain to become a stepping stone for understanding the pain of others, and to have our spirits unbroken even when our hearts are. Thank you.
When Adam Lanza did what he did, especially involving children, it just strikes me that there's a component of his, I guess I'd say his humanity that had been switched off. Almost like he became non-human or subhuman or inhuman at a minimum. And a parallel that the gentleman on the left had mentioned earlier, paralleled in very brief fashion his actions with those of Hitler. And perhaps there'd be a similar parallel with Mr. Kaczynski's brother. My question is, why does that happen? What causes humans to switch it off? I don't know that you'll have an answer, but it's been on my mind.
Thank you for your question, which is an excellent one. I don't know that I have the answer. When I hear your question, I want to think, psychiatrically and research-wise, and the things that we know about, the biological causes of violence and things. And the truth of the matter is that the causes of violence are very complex, and we understand it relatively poorly at this time. But when I've thought long and hard about this, the research shows us, at least at this point, that if you look at all the violence in society, a sliver of it, 3 to 5%, can be attributed to what we call serious mental illness in psychiatry. And most of that is directed at individuals in the person's own family. So it's very rare. So this brings up a question of where to focus on in terms of violence prevention. But I think the other thing that I've found in my career is that there are I see so many people who suffer from serious mental illness, and they could never do something like this in their entire lives, no matter what happened. And so then it occurs to me that people can do things like this if they have mental illness, or they can do things like this if they have liver disease. And then this brings me to the conclusion that in cases like this where I've studied various persons who have done what this individual did, I studied one in Binghamton, New York, that was somewhat similar. What I see is an intense anger that must be directed outwards, and that becomes blinding, and the focus is on the self and that anger to the exclusion of other things. Because the question comes up, how can people do this to another person? And I think it's a focus on the anger that overtakes the ability to make that connection. And I think, I could wax scientific, but I'm hoping that kind of generalistic part answers your question. And maybe someone else has some. Yeah.
When something like what happened here happens, people all over the world question, how could any human being do this? And, for the community, that is a more intense question. How could one of us do this? And, when somebody like my brother does this from our family, the question becomes extraordinarily, existentially intense. How could my own brother do this? Someone I love, someone I felt close to, someone who I know is capable of compassion. I don't know the whole answer. Certainly, I don't begin. I have some thoughts about it, and one is it's connected to hatred. It's like hatred in self and hatred of other really do go together. And so my biggest fear for many years, actually, after a friend's brother committed suicide, was that Ted seemed so miserable. I was afraid someday I'd hear that he'd committed suicide. And I think that was likely. In his diaries, he actually had some sort of scenario that involved murder, suicide. I think some of his aggression toward our family, our parents, which I really couldn't understand, was emotionally violent. In some sense, metaphorically, it was killing mom and dad, but it had some of that flavor. I also think we're not being honest with ourselves if we don't look at human history and say there's something somewhat normal about violence in human beings. Like, how does this happen? I mean, we have murders, we have genocides, we have wars. I remember my father telling a story from his father, who had been born in Poland and pressed into the Polish army, and he said, well, we went to fight this battle, and I don't know what happened, but we started killing everybody in the town, and then men started raping women, and these were like normal family men. How did this happen? You know, we know that part of the training of soldiers is to desensitize to the humanity of the enemy. So it's true we can be trained for compassion. You know, we can be trained to shut down compassion. So I think the highest teachings of all religious traditions is to try to create an antidote to this nihilistic possibility that probably lives to some extent in all of us, to smaller or greater degrees. When I ultimately ended up reading my brother's diaries, it was like opening a window on hell. Like, I had no idea he was suffering to this extent. So part of his dynamic, and maybe with other mass murderers, there's this incredible, intense psychological isolation. So then I think, well, if only Ted had had a friend, a mentor, and then of course I realized many people could have been, but he pushed them away, you know. But how do you reach that person that's really, really hard to reach? Certainly we see some correlation, like with bullying in the schools. So the kid is isolated, the kid feels absolutely powerless. This is not to excuse violent acting out, but it strikes me we have to really, I actually agree with Dr. Knoll, but I also think it's creating a different kind of communal consciousness as well. It's not just our individual minds, it's the candle, lighting the candle 1,000 times, that somehow we have to make this idea of compassion, we have to find a way to spread it, and not give up, and not fail to spread it with people who seem resistant to it, you know, and you know, we can't blame them for their resistance. It's like, I don't know, but I do believe that communities can actually have a collective kind of consciousness, and I have to say I'm incredibly impressed by what I've seen and read about this community in terms of your commitment, your devotion to say the victims will be remembered and positive change is going to come out of this tragedy. I think it's possible. That's what keeps me going. It's also why I practice Buddhism.
I'd just like to add to what's been said already. And I'm no expert in terms of psychiatry, just from what I've heard and the teachings that I've received. But when we experience pain, it was brought, as it has been brought up, it's in our own mind. It's not what we experience. It is our thoughts about what we experience that is where the pain lies. And people can just keep focusing on themselves and their own pain. And they don't see that there are other people that are suffering like them, and it's just turning inward and more inward. And the more inward you turn, the more you see that you're not getting what you want, and that people are continually, from your point of view, keeping you from getting what you want. And the pain just gets more and more intense. And if you think about it, even a pet dog that is the kindest, most wonderful, gentle dog, if it gets hit by a car and is still alive but seriously injured, you have to put something over its muzzle to keep it from biting you if you wanted to comfort it. You know, because its pain is so great, it could bite. Another example is in Buddhism, we talk about grounding in the ocean of suffering. And a grounding person will ground a rescuer. They're in such a state of panic that if you would swim out to them to try to rescue them, if they could grab a hold of you before you grab a hold of them, they'll be on top of you and stay on top of you until you're drowned. And I see these people as being in an incredibly strong state of panic and pain. You know, I can't say, well, this person is and that person isn't, but that's kind of the Buddhist approach to all of this.
I want to say something, just one more thing really quickly, and then I'll be quiet. But I want to just talk a little bit about what would I say, the way, contagiousness of compassion. My wife and I have quite a connection with the state of Connecticut. We actually have an apartment that we keep in Bloomfield in case they fire us at the monastery. But it goes back before that. Shortly after my brother's trial, I received a phone call from a man in Connecticut who's actually sitting right here. His name is Dr. Sam Rieger. And Sam Rieger and his wife Wanda invited me to a conference called the Melanie Eileen Rieger Conference Against Violence. And I have gone, 14 or 15 years in a row now. I'll be going again this year. And these are folks, and all the folks that work with them are people who've lost loved ones to homicide, who have made a decision. Think of the title, A Conference Against Violence. And it was there I really began first to build a bridge really to the sense that, you know, victims' families and offenders' families have a lot in common in certain ways, and we have a common cause to prevent violence and to work on healing.
I have a question for Mr. Kaczynski. On that day here in Newtown, as we started realizing what was happening, I know probably most of us thought of who we know that works in the building, what children we knew who might go to Sandy Hook, or you know what our connections might be, and worrying about those people. I'm someone, along with quite a few others, who found out later that day that I actually had a connection with the shooter's family, not with the shooter himself, but with his brother specifically. And so I just wondered what you would say to those of us who have that connection, just in terms of if and how to reach out, I guess.
Yeah, that's a real tough one, you know, because people in my position are very, you know, we're sort of torn because you love your family member, but you hate what they've done. So you don't want to disown them, but you want to disown what they did, which is what most people remember them for. You know, I think most of us carry some element of guilt, so if there's a way to say it that doesn't sound patronizing or, you know, it's not their fault. Don't isolate, because sometimes if you don't know what to say, you sort of avoid the person, and that's not good. And of course there's wrong things to say, and that's not good either. So, you know, you're in a double bind. What do you do? But I think, you know, find a way to show just kindness and decency and sympathy, and listen, maybe listen more than you talk to the person. It's not so much what you say to them, but how open your heart is, I think. And thanks for asking that question, because, you know, it's a tough one in a community like this to ask that question.
I'd like to talk about compassion. Mr. Kaczynski spoke some beautiful words a moment ago about a candle lighting a candle 1,000 times. And I think that's a lot of what we in Newtown have started and want to see happen, to the point that we start to embrace the families who are directly affected by this. My first thought was that perhaps Dr. Knoll, because of your comments about compassion, maybe you could perhaps give us a little insight on what we can do to move that process along, or what that journey might be like. And perhaps, I guess, the rest of the panel seems to be insightful in that as well. So maybe we could start with Dr. Knoll.
What a wonderful and powerful suggestion. I can tell you that in terms of, you know, community disasters and trying to get the community together,
it varies with the community, but I think open invitations to things such as this, and then slowly building up the interest and seeing who will come, not, forcing things too much, but having an open invitation and maybe a regular time that people can grow accustomed to. And it's the type of thing that, in my experience, takes a good deal of time before you build up a consensus. But then, of course, the effort's well worth it. So I would wonder about having an open venue invitation for just exactly what you have brought up, and then keeping at it.
I have, when we close this evening, I have a small exercise that we could all do together. So that might be something worth doing at the conclusion. So, yeah, yes.
Indeed, we should reach out to Ryan and Peter Lanza. They didn't do it. And Ryan Lanza is reaching out to us, saying on Facebook, what are some things we can do to prevent these things from happening? Are parents spending more time with their kids? That's what he said.
A real quick one. I'm sorry I don't remember all the names of Lama Lutheran.
We're going to put that on your nameplate.
The book that you cited, Viktor Frankl, I believe the subtitle has to do with what he called logotherapy.
Yes.
Looking to the future and taking a different vantage point to look back as to where he was. And I guess looking to see his wife once again gave him great hope and purpose. And I'm wondering, from a Buddhist standpoint, I know from a Judeo-Christian Baha'i standpoint, they're looking forward for these family members to see their children sometime in the future. We have that hope, we have that. From a Buddhist standpoint, what can they rely on from seeing their children once again in the future? Logotherapy.
Well, this is an interesting question. In Buddhism, the focus on the whole religion is mind. And mind is uncreated. There's no creator God. And it's unborn. And therefore it's undying. And so all of these people that have been killed, they will go on and take another birth. And so what you can do for them is we have what's called merit. You could call it good karma. In other words, anytime you do anything that is beneficial, any beneficial action of body, speech, and mind, Christians call it thought, word, and deed. My gosh, they're so similar. But anyway, anytime you do anything beneficial, you have created good karma. And that will, it's like a seed that later on will sprout, grow, and produce favorable circumstances and happiness. Now, these people that have been killed will be reborn. And you can dedicate any and all of this merit that you have accumulated from your good actions in the present, in the past, and in the future to those beings, and it will benefit them. You know, this is something that you can do. You cannot bring them back from the dead. You know, it's just not going to happen. But they're going to move on. They have no choice. And you can assist them by dedicating merit to them and saying prayers for them and so on and so forth. We're not helpless. The only place where freedom lies is in the present. You can't change the past. The future hasn't happened yet. We create the future in the present by our actions in the present. And it is in the present where you can either light a candle or curse the darkness. And so that's how I would approach that. And again, thank you for asking that question.
I just wanted to say something about supporting families of victims. My brother was shot last summer. He was shopping with his daughter in a Best Buy in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There was a gang shooting outside, and one of the bullets hit my brother in the chest, and he died almost immediately. There's an incredible outpouring at the beginning. A lot of it takes the form of bad food, you know, cookies, just horrible junk food, and then people say things like, it happened in Oklahoma. I was back in Oklahoma for several weeks, and they were like, the neighborhood people came around and said, just let us know what we can do, and, we're going to organize meals for you. And Kelly's like, oh, great, I'll get back to you. And it's like, she couldn't get back to them. And so, like, the meals never came, it's sort of like, they can't really tell you what they need, but quality food is a help. Also, my sister, she lives in LA. She's got a big job. She's like back at her big job, and she's like, she said, her bosses were saying things like, just take as much time as you need, but like, can you get this on my desk tomorrow? And she said she almost felt like she has she called it death cooties. It's like people feel so bad for what you've gone through. And they feel uncomfortable. They feel like, what can they say? It's not like you're really looking for anybody to make you feel better. It's like nobody can really make you feel better, but just that people, I guess, are able to just connect with you in some way and say, how are you doing? And, it's not like you always want to talk about it. But, they say, I'm sorry, thank you. Sometimes you are feeling better than at other times. Sometimes you want to talk about it, sometimes you don't. But just, to be present for people, wherever they're at. And I'm kind of getting to this point. It's been 8 months now, and it's like people, it's still very, real and present for me, but it's like kind of the people around you, they kind of forget, I think, what you're going through. I would say I'm not really the same person I was before. I'm more irritable, I'm more easily roused. It's just somebody, I think the psychiatrist said this, like, heightened sensitivity to everything. And sometimes I wish that, people I have dealings with were aware of that. They don't always seem to be. Because it's like, it's not foremost on their mind. It's probably, different, because I don't live in the place where I grew up. Anyway, that's just some thoughts that I had about that.
I have just a general question on Buddhism. I'm a teacher, a sixth grade teacher here in Newtown, and we recently completed a unit on world religions. And Buddhism, as some of my sixth grade students as we study Buddhism, we realized the ultimate state of enlightenment was nirvana. And a lot of my students would say to me, well, how do you know when you get to nirvana? If you're a Buddhist, how would you know? And one of my students said, and doesn't nirvana mean poof? Like, you're gone? So why would you want to get there? And I, not being a Buddhist, wasn't sure how to answer that. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
How would you answer that question?
Yeah. The ultimate, as Lao Tzu once said, cannot be discussed. I mean, so that's, I mean, think about it, right? Because in some places the name of God is unspeakable. You know, the idea is that the ultimate truth of being, as Lama Yeshe said, it cannot be described. But how would it be to understand what one Buddhist writer called the magic show of appearances? To really know the truth of everything, to know with certainty and completeness how your mind is and how you create your experience of the world with how you think about it. Right now, we can guess what that's like, but it's not proof. You can definitely tell your sixth graders that. You said sixth grader. You don't disappear because there are lots of Buddhists still walking around, so that's, you know. But the fact of the matter is, it is an internal state of great joy and stability. And what my teacher said to me about it, he said, it happens in an instant, but it doesn't happen by accident. Because it involves the letting go of everything, including the concept of self. And so you could say that you would know that you were enlightened if you were no longer angry ever again. You would know you were enlightened if you never had hurt feelings ever again. If you felt love and compassion for every person because you could see their pain. And think about that first before you think, well, they did this to me or they did that. So you'll know. And this understanding, they call it the path of seeing. You see how your mind is for the first time. We get inklings of it now because everybody in this room has had this experience. You got interrupted. You were having a very difficult conversation with yourself about something and you were feeling really negative about something, and then the phone rings and you answer it. And suddenly you're somebody different. All right? If you can do that, that is an inkling. That gives you an inkling that the mind can change. I mean, instantly like that. And so the key piece of meditation is to consciously do that again and again and again, coming back to what the Karmapa Lama said was your home. He said, spend some time with your home, your mind, every day. So I hope, but I really appreciate the Buddhism and the going food.
Better than a grunge band from the 90s. That was the other reference.
What was it?
I said the other reference was a grunge band from the 90s.
I just want to mention we've left some flyers. We're in Woodstock, which is not too far away. If someone would like to hear more of this, there's going to be a workshop June 14th through 16th, and we're offering that program free of charge to anyone from Newtown. And there is like a fee for lodging or and meals, but we'd also comp that to anybody who's a victim family member. Again, it's June 14th to 16th, and Dr. Knoll and Lama Yeshe will be here, and we'll also have a panel of people who've been affected by violence. So please take that if you want more information. Our phone number's out there. You can give us a call too. So, you know, if there's something that you think is valuable about this approach, come join us and find out more.
Want to recognize my friend Chamba from the Buddhist Center in Reading, and there's the man that made it possible for me to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thank you, appreciate that very much. And we spoke about having a interaction between the Buddhist community in Reading and Congregation Adopt Israel here in Newtown. I also want to mention that the solution to a lot of the negatives is really the positive, not cursing the darkness, but lighting the candle. And such a candle is in the Westcon University, which is partnered in the project of bringing the Dalai Lama here. And they have a Center for Compassionate Living. And there's a whole curriculum of living in a compassionate way. It's something that you need to study and go over and over again, because as you all know, that it's a skill to be patient and to, but you can decide to be patient. You can decide that you're going to be pull it together when the phone rings, and you can decide to be patient with your children, your spouses. It's all in here. You're driving the bus, and we have the power to make these decisions. So I think that it's time for our community to make this decision to spread the message of living compassionately, and that through these events here, these excellent panelists who we should give a really roaring round of applause. And I'd like to ask Catherine Corman to come for a special announcement. Catherine.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to you for sharing your experience with us of what it's like to be a family member. And I wanted to let all of you know that on May 5th, we will be hosting another talk here in the sanctuary, which is really going to be speaking to exactly that, how to care for family members who have lost somebody to such violence. Rabbi Seth and Sherry Mandel, who will be coming to speak, they lost their 13-year-old son to a terrorist act in Israel in 2001. And they've committed their lives since then to taking care of families who have experienced trauma and violence, terrorism. And they're going to be speaking to exactly the kinds of things that you were mentioning about what do you say, what don't you say? How do you hang in there for the long haul of taking care of our community? How do we build the resilience amongst the whole community to continue that caretaking over not just the first few months and all the bad cookies and teddy bears, but through the long haul of grieving and rebuilding resilience and trust and recovery. So that will be Sunday, May 5th. In the afternoon, probably 3 o'clock. I'm not quite sure, but you'll see announcements in the paper.
Thank you.
There's also a sign-in list, so, and also I want to, where's Scott? Where are you? Scott Wolfman? Yeah, let's give it up for Scott Wolfman. He made it happen. Thank you, Scott. Sandy Hook Promise was, really there very early on, and we must acknowledge our debt of gratitude for what they have done in this fine programming, and we look forward to partnering in the future with other fine programs with you. This would not be a Judas event. What was that word that we used? Not Buddhist, but a Jewish event, if there wasn't food. So there's plenty of nice delicacies back there. And who do we thank for that, Scott? All this food?
Who's out there?
Say that. Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Kind
after the aftershock, but I'm a teacher. I've also experienced some extreme personal tragedy. But I happen to have 3 students, 3 brothers. I'm a private learning specialist and a holistic teacher. And I have 3 students here at Sandy Hook who were there the day of the massacre who survived. And I worked with them before this happened and spoke to Dad as it was happening, and afterward came back. And while all this was going on, I remember asking myself, what can I do? Just like the rest of the world. And I want to offer something to you as a community of extraordinary love. And I said this to the family and to those who I know who've had children who passed. But I just know in my soul that immeasurable good is going to come out of Newtown. Immeasurable good that you cannot even begin to fathom. I just know. And I want to just put this out there to you, because when I thought about what I could do, initially I was going to start a nonprofit, and I was going to try to bring mental health people and people who were in the law enforcement and people who were educators and moms and families together to find out how we, as our first children's experience in life, can make it the best possible experience it can be without a lot of bureaucracy getting involved. Because I know that my background is in special ed and regular ed and so forth and so on, and I know that the bureaucracy of the school and so forth and so on gets in the way of a lot of things, which is why I work by myself. But when it really came down to it, I said to myself, I am one, and I can make one significant change. What is it that I can offer from myself? And I think that all of us have a gift to give. And I think that if you sit back and think about what you've been doing all along, you will come up with the answer of how you can help those who were victimized as children who had a loss. Now, and what I did was, I decided to take from Gandhi something I've always lived by, which is be the change in the world that you want to see. And what I did was say, I am going to be there. I am going to be myself. I am going to go back. I am going to work with these children that have been my students before this happened. I am going to work with them through this, and I am going to love them through this until we are all better than okay. And the only thing I can do is show up as myself and be the best teacher, holistic teacher, that I can be, and use my skills to design their special programs. I do with every child that I work with. I design a special program for them. And I am using my talents to create a special kind of healing environment for them that has to do with their academics, but it is my gift, and it is what I can do. I can't be there for everybody, but I can be there for this family, and I can be just me. And I have that to give. I don't know, I mean, you might be accountants, you might be lawyers, you might be, I don't know what you do for a living. But there is some way, just by being yourself, that you can be there for your community. And I just want to say that I am very, very, very privileged to have been the part of it that I have been, and that I can continue to be the part that I have been. And I do want to add one other thing. You mentioned that you knew the brother, or had some kind of connection with the without his family. And when you don't know what to say to someone, and I have been in that position many times, I just say that I don't know what to say. I know I have said many times, I can't imagine how you are hurting, but I want you to know that I'm here. That's all you have to say. If they just know someone's there, because you don't want them to isolate. And that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to just throw that out there.
Any more questions? Okay, just a brief concluding statement from our panelists, and we'll enjoy further. We'll socialize over some food shortly.
Was there a culminating activity that you wanted to try?
We were thinking about it.
Are you okay with that? Yeah, okay, thanks. The brief meditation, and it will be brief, is it's called Developing Love, a meditation practice from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama was asked, how can we address the problems in our world? How can we address the many, many difficulties that are in our world? The inequality. How can we protect the earth? How can we take care and nurture our children? How can we help the people who are oppressed in the world? And how can we bring deep spirituality to everyone? And he said that all of these can be resolved by the very last one. If we can bring meaning, love, and true compassion in our hearts, then our children will be cared for and nurtured. We will care for the earth. We will take care of those who have not. So someone asked the Dalai Lama, is the planet increasing in love, or are things getting worse? And he said, no, my experience leads me to believe that love is increasing in this world. He shared a simple practice that will increase love and compassion in the world, and he asked everyone to share it as widely as possible. And as you breathe out to yourself, think that you fill yourself with the greatest of love. You breathe in and love yourself, and breathe out and love others. Breathe in and love yourself, and breathe out and love others. Again, breathing in, love yourself and heal yourself, and breathing out, benefit and cherish others. The Dalai Lama said, if you think about people that you have difficulty cherishing, extend your love to them anyway. During the day, after you have done this brief exercise, extend that attitude to everyone you meet. Practice cherishing even the simplest people that you meet, clerks in the store, people you pass on the street, as well as all of the important people in your life. Cherish the people you love and the people you dislike. Continue this practice no matter what happens or what anyone does to you. These thoughts are very simple, inspiring, and helpful. The practice of cherishing and loving others can be taken very deeply if it is done without words, allowing yourself